The air inside the tunnels of Mordian Secundus was heavy, thick with the stench of decay, and the faint crackle of static on the Vox line added an unnerving tension to every breath. I had been part of countless operations before, but this one felt different, its weight pressing on me like the thick layers of rock above. My team was composed of the usual grim cadre, hardened veterans, death-worshipping tech priests, and a few inquisitorial agents who spoke only in cold, clipped words and even colder glances. Still, none of us could have prepared for what awaited us deep beneath the hive. I glanced at the data stick in my hand, the official transmission from the Inquisition that had ordered us to descend into the lower levels. It wasn't the first time someone had disappeared in these depths. Mordian Secundus was known for its blackened underbelly of heresy and dissidence. But this was different. This wasn't just another case of missing civilians or rogue psychers hiding in the shadows. No, this was a sign of something more. The initial findings had been disturbing, though vague. Humanoid skins stretched over metal frames, left in such grotesque arrangements that our medici couldn't even identify them at first. Some were drawn into strange patterns, others still hung like sacrificial offerings on the walls. Flesh melded with steel, like something from a nightmare. Something far darker than anything we had ever encountered. But what really unsettled me was the feeling of something watching us. We were no longer just on an investigation. We were the prey. As our squad moved deeper into the tunnels, the temperature seemed to drop, despite the thick layer of machinery and engines that powered the city above. The distant sound of our footsteps echoed back to us, distorted. We couldn't tell whether the air itself was alive, pressing in on us from all sides, or if it was simply the feeling of doom creeping closer. Then, the first of us disappeared. Jansen, a young guardsman with more courage than sense, was the first to wander too far. We didn't hear him scream. He didn't get the chance. One moment he was with us, checking the integrity of a broken pipe, and the next, gone. Nothing but a cold draft and a strange, guttural sound that had our hearts racing. What followed was the realization that Jansen had not simply walked away. His body was gone, but something else, remained in his place. His voice still echoed, reverberating off the stone walls. But when we scanned the area, there was no sign of his body. It was like his existence had been absorbed by the darkness itself, swallowed up by whatever was lying in wait for us down here. We had no choice but to press on. The Inquisitor's orders were clear. We were to retrieve any and all evidence of the heresy below. But now the nature of that task seemed far more sinister. Whatever had taken Jansen wasn't just taking lives. It was consuming them, rewriting their very essence. The threat felt alive. We reached the next chamber in silence, the only sound the whirring of our servos and the faint hiss of our respirators. The room was circular, its walls covered in strange religious symbols, some carved, others seemingly burned into the metal. I could feel my heartbeat pick up, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Something wasn't right. We moved cautiously, each step heavy with the knowledge that we might not make it out. As I peered around the edge of the room, I caught a glimpse of what could only be described as an altar, though it was like no altar I'd ever seen. The surface was smooth, but I could feel it. It was cold, almost alive in a way that made my stomach twist. Flesh hung there, stretched tight across steel beams like it was something sacred. It hit me then. This was no ordinary heresy. These weren't just rogue psychers or madmen. This was something older, something far darker. The skin priests, as the Inquisitor had called them, weren't merely hiding in the shadows. They were performing rites, terrible rites that seemed to bend the very laws of nature. The Vox crackled again, cutting through my thoughts, but it wasn't a message we were used to. It was a voice, faint and distorted, repeating something over and over. We will be whole. We will be whole. We will be whole. I knew then that the story of the skin priests was not a simple one. It was a nightmare of flesh, steel, and madness, and it was about to consume us all. We advanced, the words of the chant growing louder in my ears, each repetition pulling me further into something I couldn't escape. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the chant, as if the walls themselves were breathing. But before we could move any further, the air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. Then, the floor trembled beneath us. There was no mistaking it now. Something was coming. The ground shook again, a low, guttural rumble that echoed through the tunnel, sending vibrations up my spine. My hand instinctively gripped my laser gun tighter as the feeling of being watched intensified. The light from our suits flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and crawl along the walls. The low hum of the atmosphere grew louder, filling the air with a palpable tension. It was almost as if the walls themselves were breathing, pulling us closer to whatever monstrosity lay beyond. We moved as one, our formation tighter than ever, driven by a shared, unspoken understanding. There was something alive in this place, something ancient. The further we descended, the more the environment warped around us. The air grew colder, suffocating, and each breath became more difficult to take. I could see the others struggling with the same discomfort, sweating, shaking, their faces drawn tight with fear. But none of us dared speak it aloud. The Inquisitor's orders were clear. Do not deviate from the mission. This was more than just a simple investigation. It was a purge, a final reckoning with whatever had festered below. We passed through a corridor lined with what looked like banners, but they weren't cloth. They were skin, stretched thin over metal frames, so tightly bound they shimmered in the light. The sight turned my stomach, and for a brief moment I wondered if I was imagining it. But then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, as if something was dragging across the floor. I turned sharply, eyes scanning the room, my breath catching in my throat. The rest of the squad had already noticed, weapons drawn. A sense of dread flooded the room, thickening the air like a dense fog. The scraping noise stopped, and the silence that followed was so heavy it was almost suffocating. We exchanged tense glances, but no one dared speak. We were too deep now, too far in to turn back. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something shifting in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat, and I raised my laser gun, preparing for whatever would emerge. But it wasn't a person, or even a creature. It was worse. A face, stretched across a slab of metal, its eyes wide open, its expression frozen in a silent scream. It was human, but not. The skin was pulled tight over the skull, the lips curled back in grotesque mockery of a smile. I could see the faint pulse beneath the surface, as if life still clung to it in some twisted way. The entire room was full of them, faces staring out from every angle, eyes following our every movement. My chest tightened. There was no way to process what I was seeing. But the Inquisitor's voice cut through the air, harsh and commanding, forcing me back into focus. "Keep moving," he ordered, his tone grim but unwavering. "We have no time for hesitation." We continued forward, but now the air felt alive, vibrating with something ancient, something hungry. The deeper we went, the more the walls seemed to shift, as though the very structure of the tunnel was being remade in real time. The walls weren't just stone and steel. They were alive. Thick veins of blood-red tendrils pulsed beneath the surface, as if the flesh of the hive itself was alive and breathing. The temperature dropped further, the chill seeping through our suits, biting at our exposed skin. Each step echoed louder than the last, a constant reminder that we were not alone. And then, we saw it. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive figure, its shape obscured by shadows and the grotesque structures surrounding it. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. It was a fusion of flesh and steel, bound together in an unholy union. Long, sinewy tendrils of skin hung from the creature's body, twitching and writhing like worms. The sheer scale of it took my breath away. It was massive, towering over us with unnatural grace. It was a statue, or at least that's what I thought at first. But as we got closer, I could hear the faintest sounds. Something like breathing, but too deep, too slow to be human. And then, the unthinkable happened. A low, wet sound filled the air as the thing moved. It shifted, its massive form groaning under the strain of its own unnatural existence. I staggered backward, my mind reeling, and I heard the others do the same. In that moment, I understood. This was no relic, no forgotten artifact. This was the work of the skin priests. And this thing, this grotesque abomination, was their god. The thing they had been creating, building, stitching together for centuries. It was their ultimate sacrifice, their worship. But it wasn't just a statue, it was alive, and it was waiting for us. Before we could react, the ground shook again, harder this time, and the creature's enormous head turned, its eyeless sockets locking onto us. Its mouth, a gaping maw of jagged teeth, opened wide with a sound that made my skin crawl, like the tearing of flesh. The creature's maw, a jagged, unnatural opening, stretched wider with each passing second. The sound that came from it was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate the very bones in my chest. I couldn't think, couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place, weighed down by the sheer presence of the thing before us. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. In that instant, the Inquisitor snapped out of his shock, barking orders to the squad. His voice, harsh and commanding, broke through the paralysis that had gripped me. "Fire! Now!" he shouted, his eyes locked on the beast as it reared back, its skin and tendrils shifting in a sickening display of movement. I didn't hesitate. Instinct took over, and I fired. The sound of my laser gun echoed through the chamber, the brilliant beam of light cutting through the thick, suffocating air. But the creature didn't flinch. The shot struck it squarely in the chest, but the impact seemed to have no effect. The lasfire hissed, fizzling against the creature's skin, as if it had been absorbed into the very flesh of its body. The creature's grotesque form rippled, its tendrils twitching, as if the wound had only made it more aware of us. The others opened fire, but nothing we did had any effect. It was like shooting at a wall of living tissue, each strike absorbed by its body. My pulse quickened, panic starting to claw at my chest, but I pushed it back. I couldn't let fear take hold. Not now. We needed to think. We needed a plan. "Fall back," the Inquisitor shouted, his voice strained but resolute. "We can't kill it, yet. We need to find the heart of it, the core." That was the moment it clicked for me. This wasn't a battle we could win by conventional means. We weren't fighting a creature, we were fighting a manifestation. Something that had been stitched together from the very flesh of the Imperium, bound by dark rituals. We needed to sever its connection to the warp, to stop the ritual. "Set charges!" I shouted, my voice hoarse, the words barely audible over the chaos of battle. "We'll collapse the chamber and trap it." The squad moved in unison, their faces set with grim determination, and within seconds, the tech priest was setting plasma charges at key structural points in the room. The air around us hummed, thick with the energy of the device, and I felt a momentary sense of hope flicker within me. If we could bring this thing down, if we could collapse the very walls on it, maybe, just maybe, we would have a chance to stop whatever foul ritual had been unleashed here. The creature, sensing our shift in strategy, surged forward. Its massive, bloated form moved with an unnatural grace, faster than anything of its size should have been capable of. The floor cracked beneath its weight, and the air seemed to warp around it, bending to its will. The tendrils shot out like whips, crashing into the walls and ceiling, tearing at the very foundations of the hive. It was as if the creature was feeding on the destruction, drawing power from the chaos it caused. One of the squad members, a young soldier named Veric, was too slow to get out of the way. A tendril shot out and wrapped around him, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. His scream was cut off as the skin of his body began to peel away, the tendril absorbing him into the creature's mass. I could see the light in his eyes fade, and then there was nothing but a mangled heap of flesh left behind. "Veric!" I shouted, but it was too late. The creature had consumed him, and now there was one more face, one more soul it had claimed. The weight of the loss hit me like a physical blow. But I had no time to mourn. We had to finish this. We had to stop it, or we would all become part of its twisted form. "Charges set!" the tech priest shouted, his voice mechanical and cold. "Detonating in 5. We fell back, racing toward the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest as the ground shook beneath our feet. The creature was right behind us, its massive form crashing through the walls, the sound of its enraged growl filling the air. I could feel the heat of its breath on my neck as I sprinted, my legs burning with every step. The detonation was our only hope. If we didn't make it out in time, we would be buried along with it. "2!" the tech priest yelled. I glanced back, my heart stopping in my chest. The creature was almost upon us, its mouth opened wide, a maw of endless, writhing flesh, and I knew it was coming for me, for all of us. "1!" the tech priest shouted, and then, boom! The world exploded in a blaze of light and sound. The ground beneath us shook with the force of the detonation, the walls collapsing inward, crushing everything in their path. I was thrown forward, my body slamming into the stone floor, my vision spinning as dust and debris filled the air. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was the scream of the creature, a sound so full of rage, so full of hunger, that it seemed to echo through the very fabric of the hive. I awoke to darkness. The air was thick with dust, and I could taste the acrid remnants of the blast on the back of my throat. My body ached, every inch of me bruised from the impact of the fall. I struggled to push myself up, the weight of the rubble pressing down on my chest. My helmet's visor was cracked, flickering in and out, and the world around me seemed distant, distorted. A low groan escaped from the depths of the wreckage, a haunting reminder that I wasn't alone. The others, my squad, had to be somewhere. I couldn't afford to lose them, not after everything we had been through. I took a shallow breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The explosion had rocked the foundation of the hive, but it hadn't just been a physical blow. Something deeper, something almost primal, had shifted in the aftermath. The air felt wrong, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. "Over here!" a voice rasped from the darkness. It was the Inquisitor, his voice strained but unmistakable. He was alive. Thank the Emperor. I crawled through the rubble, my hands shaking as I pushed aside broken stone and twisted metal. The world around me groaned in protest, the collapsing hive seeming to reflect the devastation of the mission. When I finally reached the Inquisitor, I found him kneeling beside a pile of debris. He was injured, but he wasn't dead. His eyes, however, were wide with a mix of disbelief and something darker. The same feeling that had crawled under my skin earlier now seemed to have taken hold of him too. "I thought we had won," he muttered, staring at the destruction around us, his voice distant, almost detached. "But it's still here. It never truly left." I followed his gaze. The walls, once solid and unyielding, were now crumbling. But that wasn't what had caught his attention. It was something worse. Movement. A flicker in the shadows. Something unnatural skittering just beyond the light. I reached for my laser gun, instinctively aiming it into the dark, my breath catching in my throat. The Inquisitor shook his head slowly, as if trying to force sense into the madness around him. "The heart of the thing. It's not in the creature. It's in the hive. This entire place. It's alive. It's all part of it." I stared at him, confused. The weight of his words sank in slowly, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. The hive itself had been a living vessel, feeding and growing, its every crevice a breeding ground for the monstrous rituals of the skin priests. But that meant we hadn't destroyed the threat. We'd only made it stronger. "Then we have to finish it," I said, my voice low, steadying despite the overwhelming dread. "We have to end it." He looked at me then, his eyes sharp with a clarity I hadn't seen before. "We can't. The ritual's already begun. Even if we destroy the hive, it's only a matter of time before it spreads, before the curse consumes everything." His words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating me. This wasn't just a localized heresy. This was something bigger, something that would swallow more than just this hive, more than just Mordian Secundus. This was the beginning of something terrible, something that could consume the Imperium itself. I swallowed hard, pushing the fear down. We couldn't let that happen. We couldn't let it spread. But how could we possibly stop something so alive? Before I could voice the question, a sound broke the silence, sharp and metallic. It was coming from deeper within the ruins, something scraping, something shifting. I turned toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay sharp," the Inquisitor ordered, his voice low, his hand on his blade. We moved carefully, each step cautious, as if we were intruders in a place that no longer cared for the laws of the Imperium. We rounded a corner, the flickering lights casting long, jagged shadows, and there it was, the core. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a thing, not really. It was a mass of flesh, bound in twisted geometry, pulsating with a sickening rhythm. Threads of living tissue stretched between metal beams, like the veins of the hive had come alive, extending outward in all directions. But the worst part, it was moving, slowly, like something waking after a long, deep slumber. The Inquisitor raised his blade, his eyes fixed on the center of the mass, where the flesh seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what we've been searching for." I could feel it. The air around the mass vibrated, thrumming with power. The creature wasn't dead, and it wasn't a creation anymore. It was awakening. I moved forward, but my feet seemed to falter as the very ground beneath me shifted. The walls groaned again, and suddenly I realized what was happening. The hive itself, the whole structure, was reacting. It was adapting. The ritual wasn't over. It had only been dormant, waiting. And now it was coming to life. With a snap, something large and slick lashed out from the mass, a tendril wrapped in layers of flayed skin, and it struck the ground just inches from me, sending up a shower of dust and debris. The Inquisitor didn't hesitate. He charged, his blade raised high, ready to strike at the heart of this monstrous thing. I followed, but my thoughts were already racing, trying to process what we were facing. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a war, one we weren't prepared for. The tendrils of flesh rose around us, blocking the way, as the mass in front of us seemed to shift and grow, each motion feeding into the twisted power at its center. We were running out of time. The creature was coming to life, and we had only one chance to stop it. Cliffhanger. The Inquisitor's blade met the mass, but instead of cutting through, it seemed to sink into the flesh, swallowed by the pulsating tissue, as if the thing was feeding off his very strength. The Inquisitor's blade sank deep into the mass of pulsating flesh, but it was as if the very thing had absorbed it, drawing the weapon into its core like a needle into skin. I watched, frozen for a moment, as the blade's edge disappeared, swallowed by the writhing tissue. His arm tensed with effort, but he didn't pull away. His gaze was fixed, locked in a silent struggle with the creature. The air around us hummed with an otherworldly resonance, and I could feel the vibrations in my bones, deep and unsettling. Then, with a sickening sound, the blade stopped moving. The tissue seemed to thicken, wrapping tighter around the weapon, and I could hear a low squelching noise as though something deep within the mass was feeding off the blade. It wasn't just a fight to cut through the creature, it was a war for its very essence. The blade had met something far older than we could comprehend, something that had always been here, feeding off the life of this place. "Pull back," I shouted, but the words felt too hollow in the vast silence that had descended. My voice was swallowed by the dense atmosphere, barely audible above the distant, unnatural hum that seemed to echo from the heart of the hive. But the Inquisitor didn't move. His hand clenched around the hilt of his blade, as though it was the last tether to reality. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face pale beneath his helmet. He wasn't struggling against the creature anymore. He was becoming part of it. The mass shifted again, the tendrils surrounding us like a net, closing in. I could see the light from his blade flicker in the flesh, just barely visible through the pulsing tissue. It was alive, feeding, adapting. It was using the Inquisitor, using us as vessels for its corruption. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The hive was waking, the curse was spreading. "Now!" I screamed again, the panic in my voice more desperate this time. With a snap, the Inquisitor's grip on the blade faltered, and in that split second, I grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the heart of the creature. His body was stiff, as if resisting my efforts, and I realized, too late, that I wasn't pulling him away from the creature. He was fading into it. The mass shuddered violently, and I heard the unmistakable sound of bone snapping, flesh tearing, and the Inquisitor's scream. No, not his scream. It was the sound of the hive itself crying out in hunger, in need of more. His face contorted with agony, his hand still reaching for the blade that had been consumed, and then his body buckled. It wasn't the motion of a man fighting against death. It was the motion of a man accepting it. He was already changing. I yanked him back with all the strength I had left, the effort almost breaking my back as the mass began to pull at his armor. The Inquisitor's eyes locked with mine, but there was no recognition there, just an emptiness. The thing, whatever it was, had claimed him. His mouth opened in a gurgled rasp, but his words were lost in the pulse of the mass. "Let go," he whispered, his voice distant, muffled as if coming from miles away. "It's too late." I didn't know whether he was talking to me or to himself, but the truth of his words hit me with full force. It was too late. We hadn't just been fighting a creature. We had been fighting the very thing that had been embedded in the fabric of this place, the curse of the skin priests, an anomaly beyond even the most horrific legends of the Imperium. I couldn't afford to mourn him. Not yet. I had to finish this. We all had to, but I couldn't do it alone. The Inquisitor's body jerked as the flesh beneath his armor fused with the surrounding mass, melding into the hive. I could feel the pulse of his body, the beat of life fading, and the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I turned away, ignoring the pain in my chest, as the once proud officer of the Imperium became part of the curse. The walls around us twisted and groaned, the living flesh of the hive flexing as if in response to the loss of its host. The entire complex was moving now. It was alive. "We end this now," I muttered to myself, even as the echo of my voice rattled through the halls. The tech priest, still reeling from the blast, had fallen back, his mechanical limbs twisted at strange angles. But the sight of the Inquisitor's transformation seemed to ignite something in him. A grim determination to see the mission through, to finish what had been started, no matter the cost. "Demolition charges," the tech priest said, his voice distant, almost mechanical, his hands already moving to prepare the secondary explosives we had planted along the walls. His words barely made sense in my ears, but I didn't question him. I couldn't. The only choice was to burn it all down. We had to collapse the entire structure before the curse could spread. But just as we were about to make our way to the secondary charge location, the ground beneath us trembled once more. This time, it wasn't just the rumble of the collapsing hive. It was something else. Something worse. I could feel it before I saw it. The pulse of the hive itself, thrumming against the stone and steel, sending vibrations that made my teeth ache. The air around us warped. The walls, alive, shook, and I heard it. The chanting. The skin priest's chant had never stopped. I had thought it was just a fragment of my imagination, a byproduct of the madness we had descended into. But it was real. It was still here, and it was louder now. I turned to the tech priest. "We need to move now." But before I could take another step, I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the chamber, a tall, gaunt form wrapped in robes made of skin, adorned with the same markings I had seen earlier. Those cursed sigils. The priest. The one who had been the architect of all this. The priest's voice sent a cold shiver down my spine, each word as smooth and twisted as the mass of flesh and steel around us. I could feel the very walls of the hive reverberate with the power of his presence, a presence that was too unnatural, too ancient. I knew we were no longer facing a rogue cult. This was something far older, something that had existed before the Imperium, before the Emperor, something that had been waiting. The figure in front of us, the skin priest, shifted, and the air seemed to grow heavier. His body was thin, gaunt, like the very fabric of his being had been pulled and stretched beyond its natural limits. His hands, adorned with long, twisted nails, reached up to touch his own skull, pulling back the hood to reveal a face that wasn't quite human. Flesh stretched over bone. The skin itself was a mosaic of other people, their faces stitched together into an expression of eternal agony. I couldn't look away. There was something mesmerizing in the way he moved, in the way he became the flesh around him, as though it were all part of the same grotesque organism. The words came slowly, like a prayer that had been repeated for centuries, each syllable dragging with the weight of ages. "You think you can destroy us, child of the Imperium?" The voice was soft, almost soothing, but underneath it was a deep, pulsing darkness. "You cannot destroy what was never born." The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment I felt my resolve falter. The hive was alive. The priest was the living embodiment of the ritual that had been performed here for centuries. And it wasn't just his body that had been transformed. The very space we occupied had become part of this ritual. The walls, the floors, the air. It was all stitched together by the same threads of corruption. I glanced at the tech priest, whose mechanical eyes flickered as he processed what we were up against. His fingers twitched near his auspex, but he didn't move. The fear was palpable in the air now, but there was no choice. We had to finish what we had started, no matter the cost. "We don't have time for this," I muttered, though the words felt weak even as I said them. My hand tightened around my laser gun, and I steeled myself to face what was coming. The priest stepped forward, his body moving unnaturally, the sound of his flesh scraping against itself as he advanced. The very air seemed to recoil from his presence. Every step he took was a step closer to the heart of this place, to the very center of the hive's twisted existence. He moved with purpose, as if everything around him bent to his will, and as he raised his arms, I felt the temperature drop once more, the chill cutting through my armor like a blade. Behind me, I heard the distant hum of the secondary charge detonators, the faintest sign that we hadn't completely lost control of the situation. But it didn't matter. It was too late. The ritual was complete, the hive was awake, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. "I was the first," the priest said, his voice growing louder, more insistent. "I was the one who heard the Emperor's call. I was the one who understood. Flesh, spirit, and metal. All of it is the Emperor's, and we shall become one." He raised his hands, and in that moment, the very walls seemed to pulse with energy. The sound of it was like the beating of 1,000 hearts, each one synchronized with the rhythm of his words. The hive itself answered. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The air thickened, saturated with the same malevolent power that had brought this place to life. The tech priest's voice crackled through my vox link, broken but urgent. "The charge. We must. It's the only way. Now." I didn't hesitate. The tech priest had already moved to the secondary detonators, his limbs jerking as he worked to engage them. But I knew it was too late. The priest was no longer just a man. He was something else, something transcendent, part of the hive, part of the curse. The walls quivered again, but this time it wasn't the floor beneath us that was shifting. It was the hive itself, becoming more, growing. I fired, my laser beam flashing through the air, but it had no effect. The priest didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled, a slow, terrible smile, and I realized, too late, that my shot had been absorbed into the mass of flesh that surrounded us. The hive fed on the energy, growing stronger with every second. "You cannot fight it," the priest said, his voice now joined by a chorus of others, echoing in the air like 1,000 voices chanting in unison. "This is our fate. The Imperium is no more. You will become part of us, as all others have before." A flicker of motion caught my eye, and I turned just in time to see the others, what was left of my squad, emerging from the shadows, their faces pallid, eyes wide, their bodies shifting, their flesh changing. The curse had already begun to spread. The walls pulsed with it, the hive absorbing all of us, one by one. The tech priest was the first to fall, his body already twitching as the flesh of the hive stretched around him, devouring him whole. I watched, helpless, as his form melted into the walls, his scream lost among the growing noise of the hive's chant. The priest's words became louder now, as if the walls themselves were speaking in unison with him. "This is the Emperor's will. We are all his vessels." I knew then that the war had never been against just a creature or a heretic. The war had been against the corruption itself. The hive had taken root long ago, and there was no undoing it now. As the walls closed in, I made my choice. I would not die like the others, consumed by this thing. I would burn it all down. With the last of my strength, I dove for the remaining detonator, the tech priest's sacrifice fueling my final act. I pressed the trigger, knowing that the explosion wouldn't save me. It wouldn't save anyone. But at least, at the very least, it would be the end. The world went black. The explosion ripped through the hive with a deafening roar, but the shockwave wasn't what I felt first. It was the suffocating silence that followed, a deep, unnatural quiet that seemed to press in on all sides. The heat from the blast washed over me, searing my skin, and I braced myself for the impact. The world around me fractured into pieces as the air itself seemed to buckle and warp, a distortion of space and time. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, every muscle screaming in protest. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes, though I hadn't realized I'd closed them, and saw nothing but a void, a darkness deeper than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of light, it was everything. The air was thick, gelatinous, pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't move. I couldn't even feel the ground beneath me. It was as though I was suspended in a nightmare, and no matter how much I struggled, I couldn't wake up. The faintest sound reached me then, a whisper, low and hollow. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. It was the same chant, the same liturgy, the words I had heard since the moment we entered this cursed place. But now, it wasn't distant. It was inside my mind. It was in the very fabric of my thoughts. My hands trembled as I tried to move, to push myself out of the darkness. But the more I struggled, the stronger the force became. It was pulling me down, wrapping around me, suffocating me. The chant grew louder, clearer, each syllable thick with power, with presence. I couldn't escape it. But then, a flicker of light pierced the darkness. At first, it was small, a tiny pinprick in the vast void. But it grew, expanding, becoming a shape, a form. The walls of the hive had returned, but they were no longer steel or stone. They were flesh, living, breathing. Tendrils of skin reached toward me, but they weren't just the walls. They were alive, conscious, waiting. The same figure, the skin priest, stood before me. His face a grotesque mask of stitched-together faces, eyes burning with the fire of the warp. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear his words, only the pulsing hum of the hive that filled my head. His hands reached toward me, long, twisted fingers stretching into the light, and I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to join them. "You are already ours," the voice whispered again, though it wasn't the priest's voice. It was the hive's voice, the curse itself. "You are part of the flesh." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. The walls of the hive pressed in closer, the tendrils wrapping around my limbs, pulling me deeper into the mass. I was becoming part of it, and there was no escape. The last shred of my mind, the last spark of who I was, struggled to hold on, to fight back against the overwhelming tide of darkness. I thought of the others, of what had happened to them. The Inquisitor, the tech priest, the squad. Had any of them survived the blast? Had they too been claimed by this thing? And then, in the depths of my despair, a thought, a memory, flashed through my mind. The detonators, the secondary charges. Had they detonated? Or had the explosion been a trap, a ruse designed to draw us in, to consume us? I couldn't tell. I didn't know. But I knew one thing. The curse wasn't finished. It had only just begun. With every ounce of willpower left, I pushed back. I broke through the darkness, forcing my hand to move, my body to respond. My chest burned and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. I would not be consumed by this. I would not become part of it. The chant was growing louder now, a maddening crescendo, until I thought my skull would shatter from the pressure. I had to end it. I had to stop this, once and for all. I reached out, my hand trembling, and I felt something cold, beneath my fingers. The detonator. It was still there, buried beneath the weight of the hive's power. I could feel its pulse, its connection to the mass of flesh around me. The fuse had been triggered, I was certain of it. But there was no countdown, no timer. It was waiting for me to make the final choice. "Do it," the priest's voice echoed inside my head, and I knew what he meant. The detonator was the only way. But if I activated it, it would destroy everything. The hive, the curse, the Imperium. And maybe, just maybe, it would take me with it. But if I didn't, if I hesitated, it would spread. It would consume the entire sector, and everything we had fought for would be lost. The tendrils were closing in, squeezing tighter around me, but I reached down, my hand seizing the detonator with what little strength remained. I pressed the trigger, but nothing happened. Why? I had done everything right. The charges had to have gone off. The mass around me began to stir violently, as if sensing the disruption. The walls pulsed, and the sound of the chant rose in a deafening roar. My heart pounded in my chest, and my pulse felt like it was syncing with the hive's, an unholy rhythm, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Then, the world exploded. The blast wasn't the deafening roar of a normal explosion. It was a sickening, wet rupture, the sound of flesh being torn apart, the sound of the very fabric of the hive unraveling. The walls of the hive convulsed, spasmed, and with a sickening crack, the mass of flesh split open like an obscene flower. A black, oily smoke poured from the wound, swirling into the air like a living thing. And then, silence. I could hear my own breath, ragged and desperate. But it was all that was left. The hive was gone. But the curse would never leave. The silence was almost worse than the roar of the explosion. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the entire hive had inhaled a final breath, holding it in a space where time no longer existed. My lungs ached, my mind still reeling from the catastrophic destruction. I was alive, but I didn't know for how long. The world around me was a blur of smoke, and the faint flicker of ruined lights, casting broken shadows on the walls of the chamber that had once been alive with pulsing flesh. Now, it was still. I tried to stand, my body unresponsive at first, as if the shock of the blast had numbed everything. But the air was different now. The oppressive weight, the malevolent hum that had filled the walls of the hive, was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness. For a moment I wondered if we had won, if the explosion had severed the connection between the hive and the curse, leaving nothing but ash and silence in its wake. But that feeling, that wrongness still lingered. It gnawed at the back of my mind, an unease that I couldn't shake. The battle, the explosion, it hadn't been enough. The curse wasn't just confined to this place. It was something larger, something deeper. The hive might have collapsed, but the infection had already taken root, spreading far beyond what we had destroyed. I could feel it in my bones, the knowledge that what we had witnessed, what we had fought, was just the beginning. I forced myself to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. The detonation had cleared the air in the immediate vicinity, but the walls, the structures, they had been warped beyond recognition. Flesh and steel melted together in grotesque patterns, and the remains of the skin priests, their twisted figures, half consumed by the mass, were little more than husks now. But there was no sign of the others. The squad, the tech priest, the inquisitor. They were gone. Either lost to the blast or claimed by the hive before it had fallen. I scanned the ruin for any trace of life, any sign of movement. But the only thing I saw was the smoke, still swirling in the aftershock of the explosion. I could taste the bitterness of it in the air, the lingering taste of blood, of something that shouldn't have been. My helmet's HUD flickered briefly, then stabilized. The readouts were still operational, but it didn't matter. The mission had failed. The hive had been brought down, but the true horror had already escaped. The voice in my head, the echo of the chant, still resonated like a distant memory, a whisper on the edge of my consciousness. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but it wouldn't leave. It was too embedded now. That damnable, insidious chant. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a part of me. I stumbled through the ruins, my steps echoing against the twisted mass of flesh and metal, the remnants of the hive. Each footstep felt heavier, as though the very ground beneath me was fighting back, unwilling to release its hold. I kept moving, though. I had no choice. And then I saw it. A flicker of motion. The faintest shift in the smoke. I turned, my laser gun raised instinctively, but what I saw made me freeze in my tracks. There, amidst the destruction, a figure emerged from the shadows. Its form was hunched, unnatural, its limbs twisted and elongated like something birthed from the warp itself. But it wasn't one of the skin priests. This was different. The skin of the figure was stretched tight across a skeletal frame, but the face was unmistakable. The Inquisitor. I gasped, the breath catching in my throat, but the figure didn't move towards me. Instead, it stood there, still as a statue, its eyes, those hollow, empty sockets, fixed on me. There was no sign of recognition in its gaze, no trace of the man I had known. It was as if the Inquisitor had been absorbed into the hive, his body twisted and reshaped into something else entirely. His mouth opened, but the words that came out were not his own. The flesh will reclaim all. We are eternal. The voice was a chorus, not his voice, but the voice of the hive itself, reverberating through the walls, filling the air like the echo of 1,000 voices. The ground trembled again, but this time it wasn't the collapse of the hive. It was the pulse of the curse, reverberating through the very planet beneath us. I took a step back, my hand tightening on the laser gun, but I knew it was useless. There was nothing left to fight. This wasn't a creature that could be slain. This was an infection, an idea, an entity that had woven itself into the fabric of existence. No weapon, no explosive, No ritual could banish it. It had already spread beyond this place, beyond the ruins of the hive. The figure raised its hand, and the walls around us shuddered. The tendrils of flesh, still writhing in the ruins, began to move again, slowly, purposefully. They reached for the figure, surrounding it, wrapping around its form like a cocoon, pulling it into the mass of the hive, where it would join with the others. I realized then that the Inquisitor was not the last. He was the first, but there would be others, so many others, and they would be changed by this. The curse was not confined to the hive, nor was it even confined to this planet. It had been given form. It had been given life. And now, it was spreading. I backed away, my thoughts racing, but I knew there was no escaping it. Not now, not anymore. The curse had escaped. I turned and ran, the weight of it all crashing down on me, but I didn't look back, not even once. Cliffhanger. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the chant, louder than ever, echoing through the ruins, growing, calling, not just to me, but to the entire Imperium. I ran, but the weight of what I had seen, what I had heard, dragged at me like an anchor. The walls around me shifted, pulse-like movements rippling through the hive's twisted form as if it had developed a will of its own, following me, watching me. Every step I took felt like a betrayal, each breath heavier than the last, as if the very air was thickening with the curse's reach. The echoes of that chant reverberated through my mind, louder now, more insistent, as if the hive was trying to speak directly to me, to pull me back. It was no use. The cursed thing had already taken root. There was no escaping it, not physically and not mentally. The weight of it pressed down on me, not just from the ruins of the hive, but from something deeper, something far more sinister. The Inquisitor's hollow eyes, the faces of the fallen, the nameless horrors that had been absorbed into this thing. This was only the beginning. My steps faltered. I could feel my body aching from exhaustion, my limbs begging for respite, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. I couldn't afford to stop. But there was no exit. There was no clean break. The walls were closing in around me, the corridors bending and twisting in ways they should not have. The once solid structure of the hive had become an unholy labyrinth, each passage leading to more confusion, more corruption. Every turn felt like it was designed to keep me from escaping, to pull me deeper into its nightmare. I stumbled into another chamber, its vastness impossible to comprehend in the flickering light. The air was colder now, as if the walls themselves were breathing in rhythm with the curse. The shadows lengthened, growing darker with every passing second. The oppressive weight of the place grew heavier, suffocating, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Then I heard it. A whisper at first, faint but unmistakable. "We are Legion." The voice didn't come from any one direction. It was everywhere, filling the room, inside my head, in the very air around me. I wasn't alone. I never had been. I turned, weapon at the ready, but there was nothing. Nothing but the endless, writhing shapes of the hive's corrupted remains. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving, watching, waiting. The same sensation from before. The curse clung to me, filling the space like a dark mist. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage, but no. There, at the far end of the chamber, stood a figure. It was hunched, its silhouette distorted, elongated. The skin was stretched thin over bones, like an abomination of flesh and bone, sewn together from the scraps of the dead. And there, within the folds of its mass, were faces, so many faces. Some still recognizable, some unrecognizable, all frozen in eternal torment. I felt my stomach churn as the figure stepped forward, its movements unnaturally fluid, like a puppet being controlled by strings. It was alive, but not alive in the way a person was. It was more than that. This thing had become the embodiment of the curse, a vessel for all the lost souls who had been consumed by the hive, now brought together in one grotesque form. It wasn't just the Inquisitor anymore, it was the entire hive, every twisted soul, every corrupted form, woven into this living, breathing nightmare. "You should have joined us," it whispered, its voice the amalgamation of hundreds of voices, each one distorted, breaking through the veil of the warp. It was the voice of the curse, of everything we had unleashed. "We are the Emperor's will." I wanted to scream, to pull away, but my body wouldn't respond. The horror before me had taken root in my very mind, in my very soul. The curse was not just in the walls or in the flesh of the hive. It was inside me now, but I couldn't let it consume me. Not yet. The figure took another step forward, and the air grew colder, thicker. Its presence radiated a horrible sense of inevitability, of an end that had already been written. The fate of the Imperium, of humanity itself, was intertwined with this cursed mass. It would not stop. It could not stop. I forced myself to move. My feet, stiff and unsteady, carried me toward the exit. But the figure was faster. It moved with horrifying grace, its limbs stretching, bending in impossible ways. The faces within it twisted, each one contorted in agony, pleading for release. The whispering grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, drowning out everything. "You cannot escape." I had to reach the surface. I had to warn them. If I didn't, if I couldn't stop this, it would spread. The Imperium, the galaxy, none of it would be spared. I turned, sprinting toward the end of the chamber, desperate to escape, but as I neared the threshold, the ground shook. The walls groaned with a deep, resonating hum, and the passage before me collapsed. A flood of thick, black ichor surged toward me, flooding the space, choking out the light. The curse was everywhere, and it was coming for me. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy, a whisper in my ear. "You are already one of us." And then darkness. I woke with a jolt, gasping for air, my throat raw as if I had been drowning in the very air itself. The darkness around me felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves had closed in while I was unconscious. My eyes darted across the space, but all I could see were faint shadows moving in the periphery of my vision. I reached out, instinctively feeling for my laser gun, only to find nothing but cold, wet stone beneath my fingertips. The whispering was still there, just beyond my comprehension, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through my skull. It was the curse. It was everywhere. I could feel it curling around my mind, worming its way into my thoughts like a parasite. "You are already one of us." The words echoed again, and I tried to push them out of my mind, but they clung to me like oil. I couldn't escape it. There was no more me. There was only this endless pull of the hive, of the curse, of the thing that had become so much larger than any of us. The figure, the mass, the priest, they had been its heralds. But now, it was bigger. The curse wasn't contained anymore. It had grown beyond the hive, beyond the planet, and it was spreading, reaching out like a web to consume everything it touched. I pushed myself to my feet, my limbs weak and unsteady. But I knew I couldn't stay down for long. The walls of the chamber pressed in, the ground underfoot still trembling with the aftershocks of the destruction. But this was different. The air wasn't just thick with dust and smoke. It was alive, pulsing with the same heartbeat I had felt earlier, like the hive had taken on a mind of its own. I forced myself to move, my legs shaking with each step, but I couldn't stop. The air seemed to twist with every footfall, the shadows dancing just outside my vision, ever watchful, ever alive. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way to warn them, warn the Imperium. But the closer I got to the exit, the harder it became to think straight. The curse was in my mind, pulling at my thoughts like a puppeteer pulling strings. It was feeding on my doubt, my fear, my exhaustion. I made it to a doorway, but as I passed through, I found myself back in the same chamber I had just fled. The walls stretched before me like an endless maze, twisting and contorting in ways that defied reality. The whispering grew louder, the chant rising to a maddening crescendo. It was all around me. I couldn't escape it. The walls, the floor, the air, everything was part of it now. You cannot escape what you have become. The words were louder now, clearer, and I realized they weren't coming from the walls. They weren't even coming from the air. They were coming from within me. I stumbled forward, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. The world around me felt like it was closing in, a trap with no way out. I had to fight. I had to hold on to whatever shred of myself I had left. But the curse, the hive, was inside me now, twisting and warping every thought, every emotion. I could feel it, seeping through my veins, infecting my very soul. My hands trembled as I reached up to tear off my helmet, desperate for some semblance of clarity, but the instant I did, I heard it. A voice, soft and insistent, like a memory I couldn't quite place, whispering my name. Join us. I spun around, my laser gun raised, but there was nothing but the endless shifting walls of flesh and bone, the distant echo of my own breathing. I was alone. I had to be. The others, those who had come with me, they were gone. Consumed by the hive, lost to the curse. And now, I was alone in this nightmare, trapped within the very thing I had tried to destroy. I turned again, stumbling toward the only exit I could see. But the way forward had vanished, replaced by more twisting living walls. The hive had closed in completely. I was trapped. We were all trapped. You are the last. The voice was so close now that I could feel it, pressing against my mind, suffocating me. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence, an entity that had taken hold of everything, and I was its final thread. I collapsed to my knees, the weight of it all crashing down on me. I had failed. There was no salvation, no redemption. The Imperium, everything, was already lost. The curse had won. And then, the whispering stopped. For a brief moment, everything was silent. And then, I felt it. A pulse, a wave of raw, agonizing power that radiated from the core of the hive. The ground beneath me shuddered, and I realized too late that the walls weren't just closing in. They were moving. The hive was expanding again, reaching beyond the chamber, beyond the planet itself. It had already spread. It had already escaped. And now it was moving toward the Imperium. It was coming for us all. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the figure of the Inquisitor, standing in the doorway, his hollow eyes fixed on me. And then I heard the whisper again. We are eternal. And I knew in that moment that it was too late. The darkness closed in tighter, and I felt my pulse hammering in my chest, as if it too was being swallowed by the crushing weight of the curse. I didn't know how long I'd been trapped in this nightmare. Time was slipping away, becoming meaningless. But as I sat there, surrounded by the living walls of the hive, something began to shift within me, a recognition of what I had to do. There was no escape from this place, no more running. I had been brought to the edge of the abyss, and it was either fight or become part of the thing that consumed everything I had ever known. The walls around me seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, thrumming with an energy that was far too familiar now. I could hear the voices again, but this time they were no longer whispering. They were screaming, wailing, calling to me. It wasn't just the hive anymore. It was the souls of those who had been consumed, the echoes of the skin priests, the Inquisitor, and the rest of the lost. Their voices melded into one, a chorus of eternal suffering, pulling at me like tendrils of flesh and bone. Join us! I could feel it, the pull. It was stronger now than it had ever been before. It wasn't just a temptation. It was an order. The curse wanted me, just like it had claimed the others. It wanted me to surrender, to become part of it, to give in to the inevitable. But something deep within me, a spark that had refused to die, pushed back. I couldn't let it win. Not like this. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling as my legs trembled beneath me. My hand reached for the weapon at my side, and my fingers brushed the hilt of the laser gun, now almost a weightless part of me. I wasn't sure how much more I had left, but I wasn't ready to die. Not like this. Not lost. The walls around me shifted again, their grotesque faces staring out from every corner, the hollow eyes following my every movement. I could see the figures of the skin priests in my peripheral vision, shifting, weaving in and out of the shadows. But they were no longer just figures, they were parts of the hive itself, fusing with it. The curse had taken them, absorbed them, and now they were just echoes. "You are nothing," the voice echoed through the chamber, more powerful than ever. It was the priest, or what was left of him. His voice, the hive's voice, was everywhere. "You are already part of us, you cannot escape." I closed my eyes for a moment, but that didn't stop the vision, the truth, from flooding my mind. The hive, the curse. It wasn't just a twisted organism, it was a concept, a manifestation of something far older, far darker. It had become the will of the warp itself, an unstoppable force weaving its threads into the very fabric of the Imperium. I shook my head. Number I would escape. I had to escape. There was one last thing I could do, one final chance. I began moving again, slowly at first, my steps dragging against the shifting ground. I had to find it, the core, the very center of the hive, the place where it all began. If I could reach it, if I could destroy the heart of the curse, then maybe, just maybe, I could stop it from spreading, from reaching beyond this place. But as I moved, the shadows grew longer. The walls began to close in on me, and I felt the crushing pressure of the curse, trying to drag me back. I could hear the chanting again, louder now, filling every corner of my mind. It wasn't just an external force anymore. It was within me. It was becoming me. I had been marked. I had been chosen. I reached the center of the chamber, the place where the walls converged, the very heart of the hive. It was a grotesque thing, a pulsating mass of flesh and bone, and at its core was the shape of something familiar, a twisted mockery of the Inquisitor, his face stretched and contorted in eternal pain. He was not dead. He was part of it now, part of the curse. I felt a cold rush of despair. This is it. This is the end. But no, I couldn't give in. Not yet. I drew in a sharp breath, my hand shaking as I reached for the last remaining explosive charge strapped to my side. This was it. This was the final act. I couldn't stop the curse from spreading, but I could make sure it would never reach anyone else. The Imperium wouldn't know what had happened here. They wouldn't hear the stories of what we had found. I would erase it. I would burn it all down. The figure in front of me, the Inquisitor's face twisted in eternal agony, stirred, but it wasn't him anymore. It was the curse trying to stop me. I could feel it tugging at me, pulling at my mind, trying to take control of my thoughts, my body. But I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the detonator, and with all the strength I had left, I pressed the button. The explosion came first as a sharp crack, like the breaking of bone, and then a roar, deafening in its intensity. The walls of the hive shuddered violently as the charge detonated, a shockwave that rattled everything in its path. Flesh and metal erupted around me, tearing apart in all directions. I was thrown back by the force of it, my body slamming into the ground, the air thick with smoke and debris. But the ground didn't stop shaking. The curse didn't stop. The shockwave continued, reverberating through the hive, pushing outwards, feeding into the warp. It wasn't just a local event. It was the beginning of something bigger. I felt it. I heard it. The pulse of the warp, the pulse of the hive. It was alive. And I realized, in that moment, that the curse would never truly die. It would never be contained. Not as long as the Imperium existed. It would find its way back. It would spread. I crawled forward, the debris and smoke clouding my vision. But I knew what was coming. I could feel it. The curse hadn't been destroyed. It had merely been delayed. And the Imperium would never know what had happened here. Cliffhanger. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the face of the Inquisitor, staring at me from the depths of the wreckage. His hollow eyes were empty, but they still seemed to burn with something that would never go away. The darkness didn't fade. The shockwave, the explosion, I felt them, but it was as though they had never really happened. The world around me was still, suspended in the aftermath. I could hear my heartbeat, faint and weak in my ears, but that was the only sound in the void. My vision blurred as the dust clouded my thoughts, and for a moment I thought I might be dead. Perhaps it had finally consumed me, pulled me into the hive's endless grasp. But no, my hands were trembling, still gripping the laser gun that had been my last tether to reality. I wasn't dead, at least not yet. I was alone. The others were gone. The blast had scattered them like dust in the wind, their fates sealed by the curse, their bodies lost to the mass. I pushed myself up from the rubble, my legs protesting with every movement. My chest burned as I inhaled, the smoke and ash thick in the air, choking the life out of what little remained of the hive. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach twist in on itself, was the sound. The sound of the curse still whispering, still breathing. I wasn't alone. The walls around me were moving again, bending with unnatural speed, as if the very structure of the hive had taken on a new life. Flesh crawled over the jagged metal, and the walls writhed like they were alive. I could see it now, threads weaving in and out of the broken infrastructure, stitching the hive back together. It was healing, rebuilding itself, and with every movement, I could feel the curse, the power of it, reaching out. It wasn't just confined to this place. It was reaching for the stars, stretching across the Imperium, seeking to spread. I took a step back, my laser gun raised, but I knew it was useless. The weapon that had served me through so many battles was nothing but a symbol now. The curse was beyond physical form, beyond weapons or tactics. It was idea. It was will. A will that had absorbed the minds, the very souls of those who had fallen here. I could still hear the whispers of the Inquisitor in the back of my mind, those last words that had rattled me to my core. You are the last. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a statement. It was truth. I was the last. The Imperium would never know what had happened here. We were forgotten, lost to the curse before anyone could even comprehend what it meant. The curse was a stain on reality itself, and it was spreading, infecting everything it touched. I staggered forward, my feet dragging, but something inside me refused to let go. I couldn't let it spread. Not like this. I had to find a way to stop it, to at least sever its connection to the Imperium before it consumed everything. But the more I moved through the ruin, the more I felt the curse's weight pressing down on me. The walls were no longer just flesh. They had become something else, something more. They were a reflection of the curse, an extension of its will, a living, breathing manifestation of corruption. The deeper I went, the more I could hear it. The hive itself, breathing, pulsing, expanding with every passing second. I had to destroy the core now, before it became something more. I had no other choice. The ground beneath me quivered again, and I saw it. The heart. It was unlike anything I had imagined. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a structure. It was something beyond that, a pulsing mass at the center of the hive, encased in thick, fleshy tendrils that coiled and uncoiled like serpents. And within the mass, I saw shapes, faces, people, the lost. They were still alive, trapped inside the hive, unable to escape. I could feel their eyes on me, their silent screams reaching out, pulling at my mind, urging me to join them, to become part of the curse. But I had already made my choice. I had already decided. This was the end. I reached for the last of the explosives, the detonator cold and familiar in my hand. But before I could press the button, a voice stopped me. You cannot end it. The voice was familiar, yet distant. It was the Inquisitor, or what was left of him. His face, now melded into the hive, was an unnatural vision, stretched and twisted beyond recognition. He was no longer a man. He was part of the curse, a vessel for something far older, far more terrible. You can't destroy what is already part of you. The walls around me quivered again, and I felt it, the connection, the hive, the curse. It was inside me, feeding on my doubt, on my fear. I could hear the whispers of the Inquisitor in my mind, the voices of the lost, all urging me to join them, to surrender. But no, I refused. I wasn't like them. I wasn't going to let the curse win. With trembling hands, I pressed the detonator. The ground exploded beneath me, the world around me shattering into chaos. The pulse of the curse faded for an instant, replaced by a brilliant white light that flooded the chamber. The walls collapsed, flesh and metal breaking apart like the body of a dying god. The heartbeat of the hive slowed, the power draining from it in waves, as if something deep within it had been severed. But the light didn't last. The darkness came again, just as thick, just as suffocating. I knew then that the curse wasn't gone, it was only delayed. And the Imperium? The Imperium would never know what had happened here. The curse would spread, and no one would be prepared. The galaxy wasn't ready for this, but I had done what I could, and now there was only one thing left to do. I began to walk, my footsteps echoing in the now silent ruins of the hive. The weight of the curse still pressed on me, but I didn't stop. Not yet. There was no more hope, but there was still the fight, and it was all I had left. The aftermath of the explosion was an eerie calm, like the planet itself was holding its breath. My legs felt like lead, the weariness of everything that had happened crashing over me in waves. I kept moving, one foot after the other, even though every step felt like it could be my last. The blast had shattered the hive, yes, but it hadn't truly ended the curse. It wasn't just contained here, in this place, in this twisted ruin of flesh and metal. It was in the very air I breathed, deep in my mind, in the warp itself. The detonation had left nothing but wreckage. What was once the heart of the hive had collapsed into a pile of smoking rubble, the mass of pulsing tendrils now nothing more than a decaying husk. But the remains of the cursed structure still shifted. It wasn't gone. It was adapting, growing even now. The walls were cracking open, the tendrils reaching outward like they were looking for something, anything to latch onto. I thought of the others, the Inquisitor, the tech priest, my squad. They had all been lost to the hive's twisted embrace, but their faces, their voices, they were still with me, still calling, still pulling. I shook my head to push the thought away, focusing instead on what was left, what little remained of the mission. I had to get out. I had to leave this place before it consumed me, before I became like the others. But every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the ruins, further into the maw of the hive. It was as if the very ground was pulling me back, guiding me toward the heart of the curse once more. The air felt wrong now, thick with the essence of something ancient and hungry. It wasn't just the scent of burning flesh or the acrid smell of decay. It was something deeper, something older. The curse had woken, and now it had its sights set beyond this hive. It wasn't just about this planet anymore. It was about the galaxy. I heard something, a faint sound. My breath hitched as I turned, my hand instinctively reaching for my weapon, but there was no one there. No enemy, no squadmate, no Inquisitor. Just shadows, flickering in the ruins. But then, a voice, soft, faint, like a whisper on the wind, reached my ears. "You cannot escape." It was the same voice, the one that had echoed through my mind for what felt like eternity. The voice of the curse, the voice of the hive. I stumbled forward, my breath ragged, my body still reeling from the destruction I had just unleashed. But I couldn't stop. The walls around me shifted again, the stone groaning as the hive slowly regenerated itself. The faces of the lost stared at me from the walls, their eyes empty and lifeless, their mouths twisted in silent screams. The curse was still alive, still waiting. I reached for the detonator once more. It was the only thing I had left, the only way to stop it from spreading further. But as my fingers closed around the cold metal, I hesitated. The explosion had only been a temporary solution, a delay. The curse had not been eradicated. It had merely been pushed back, forced to wait. "You are part of us now," the voice whispered again. And this time, I felt it. The truth. The curse wasn't just a thing. It wasn't just a structure. It was a presence, a force that fed on the Imperium's endless wars, its suffering. It had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. I could feel it in my chest, the pulse of the curse, the pull of the hive beckoning me closer. It was like a living thing, hungry, desperate. And it wanted me. It wanted all of us. I wasn't just a soldier. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a vessel. But I refused to let it win. I glanced at the detonator again, my mind swirling with thoughts of failure, of the death of everything I had once fought for. The Imperium, the Emperor, none of it would be enough to stop this. The curse had already won in its own way. But there was still one thing left I could do. I had to make sure it never spread beyond this place, never reached Terra, never infected the stars. I found my resolve, somewhere deep within, and pushed the button. The explosion came again, not the sharp crack of the previous detonation, but a deafening roar. The ground shook beneath me, the walls buckling as the entire structure trembled. Flesh and bone exploded outward, the hive collapsing in on itself, and I could hear the anguished wail of the curse as it was torn apart, ripped from its roots. I ran, my feet pounding against the stone, the tremors almost too strong to keep my balance. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. The hive, the curse, it was all collapsing behind me, consumed by its own destruction. I had done it. I had stopped it, at least for now. The entrance to the surface was close. I could almost taste the fresh air, the promise of freedom, of escape. But the ground trembled again, and I felt a sickening sense of wrongness. It was too late. The walls shifted again, and I knew then that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I fought, this would never be over. The curse had not been destroyed. It had only been contained. And as long as the Imperium stood, as long as there was conflict, war, suffering, it would never die. I stumbled toward the exit, the voices still whispering in my mind, still pulling at me. But the rest of the galaxy had no idea. They had no idea what was coming. The curse was alive, and it would never stop. The ground beneath my feet seemed to crumble with each step I took, the surface splitting and shifting as the very walls of the hive fought to keep its hold on me. I could feel it, the pull, the curse clawing at the edges of my consciousness, whispering with the voices of the lost, the damned. But I couldn't stop now. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let it win. Not when I was so close. But the air was wrong. It was thick, heavy with the sense of something moving, something alive that wasn't supposed to be. I felt the presence of the hive around me, even though I was supposed to be leaving it behind. The walls of the corridor I was in seemed to breathe, the stone and flesh warping in time with the deep thrum that pulsed from deep within the hive. I turned a corner and saw the light up ahead, the surface. I could almost taste it, the fresh air that had been so far beyond reach for so long. It would only take a few more steps, a few more minutes, and I would be free, free of this nightmare. But just as I reached the door, something stopped me. A noise. Not behind me, but ahead of me. It was soft at first, just a whisper, but as I strained to listen, it grew louder. A scratching sound, dragging itself through the darkness, like claws against metal. I froze, my pulse racing in my chest. The curse wasn't done with me yet. It never would be. The walls ahead of me rippled, the tendrils reaching out once more, and I heard a voice. No, not a voice, a hiss, like something being dragged across stone. You are not meant to leave. The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and final. I whipped around, my laser gun raised, but there was nothing. No figure, no creature. Just the walls closing in, the cursed whispers rising from all around me, melding with the very fabric of the hive. And then, I saw it. A shadow in the distance, moving unnaturally, like it was part of the hive itself, growing from the very bones of the structure. It wasn't a person anymore, not a creature. It was a part of the curse, an extension of it. The walls around it shimmered, bleeding into something unnatural, the air itself distorting, as though reality itself was bending to its will. The figure reached toward me, its hands stretched out, but its arms, twisted, elongated, were not human anymore. They were made of flesh and bone, but they weren't just connected to the body. They were connected to everything. The walls, the floor, the very air. It was the hive reaching out, calling to me. I tried to raise my weapon, to take the final shot, to stop this thing, but my arms felt heavy, as if the very air was pulling them down. The gun felt like lead in my hands. I couldn't move. The figure's face was a blur, an impossible nightmare of stretched skin and jagged lines, like the faces of the priests, but distorted, melted into one grotesque mass. Its eyes, hollow and empty, locked onto mine, and I felt the pull, the same pull I'd felt when I first laid eyes on the hive. It was drawing me in. It wanted me. It wanted all of us. We are all connected, it said, its voice not one, but many. It was the priest, the curse, the hive speaking through it. You are already part of us. You can't escape. I stumbled backward, my body weak, my mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't the end. I wasn't going to be swallowed by this thing. But as I looked at it, at the figure, I saw it for what it truly was. It wasn't just a creature. It wasn't just some monstrous thing created by the skin priests. It was the curse itself. The mass of flesh and bone, the souls trapped inside it. This was the will of the warp, of something older, something far darker than anything I could comprehend. It was not just a plague, not just a force of corruption. It was a concept, an idea, a force that fed on conflict, on suffering, on the darkness within every living soul. It was the perfect weapon, the perfect infection. I stood there, frozen, as the figure reached closer, its voice growing louder in my head, the whispering filling every corner of my mind. I couldn't escape. There was no going back. I had to destroy it. I had no weapon left, no force to stop it, but I had something else. Something that had been inside me the whole time. I wasn't just a soldier. I wasn't just a victim of the curse. I was part of it. I was connected to it, just like the Inquisitor had been, just like the tech priest had been, just like every person who had stepped foot on this cursed world. I was the last, yes, but not in the way I had thought. I was the final link in the chain. And now I had to break it. With every ounce of strength, I pushed forward, my body moving despite my mind's hesitation. I didn't have much time, but I could feel the final pieces of the curse closing in around me, pulling me deeper. There was only one choice. I grabbed the nearest object, a piece of broken metal, anything to use against the force that was calling to me. I swung it with all my might, my body screaming in protest, and hit the figure. It screamed, a high-pitched, unnatural sound that vibrated through my bones, but it didn't stop. It didn't retreat. It came closer and closer and closer. And then something cracked inside me. The figure's face twisted, contorting into something that resembled pain, and I saw it for what it truly was, a hollow shell, a vessel for the curse, a parasite. The figure lunged forward, but as it did, the walls around me began to fracture. Flesh peeled away, the metal warping, twisting into impossible shapes. The world began to break apart. And then, just as I thought it would all end, I heard it. A thud. The walls around me shuddered one last time, and in that moment, everything went black. The darkness didn't come in an instant. It crept into my senses, wrapping itself around me like the thickest fog, blotting out everything else. The moment I lost sight of the figure, the moment it vanished into the collapse of the hive, a strange calm overtook me. There was no explosion, no earth-shattering noise this time, just the oppressive weight of silence that hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I lay there, face pressed into the dust, body still and numb. I couldn't feel the tremors anymore, the constant shuddering of the hive. It felt like time had stopped, the hum of the warp, the gnawing whispers in the back of my mind. Everything had gone still. It was over. Or so I thought. I rose slowly, unwillingly, my body refusing to move the way I wanted it to. Every part of me ached, every muscle bruised from the chaos I'd been thrown into. I should have been dead by now. The explosion, the curse, everything should have claimed me. But I was still here, still breathing, still alive. I pushed myself upright, using the remnants of a broken pillar to steady myself. The world around me was a ruin. The once living walls of the hive now reduced to charred husks of flesh and steel. The oppressive thing that had filled the air was gone, but in its place was an emptiness so profound I could feel it pressing on my chest, weighing me down. But something else lingered. I couldn't quite place it at first, but it felt like a pulse. Distant, far below the ground where the hive had once thrived, the center of its corrupted heart. It was faint, like a whisper barely audible over the roar of blood in my ears, but it was there. It was a slow, rhythmic beat, one that felt like it was calling to me. The pulse of the curse had not ended. It had merely waited. I glanced around, my eyes darting over the wreckage of the hive's remains. There was no sign of the others, the Inquisitor, the tech priest, my squad, nothing but the devastation. But the whispers lingered in my mind, persistent, clawing at my thoughts. I shook my head to clear the ringing that filled my ears, but it only grew louder. It wasn't just in my head. I turned, looking around frantically, my heart picking up pace. The ground beneath me was shifting again, the walls, the remnants of them, twitching as though they were coming alive. The blood-soaked stones cracked and splintered, expanding like the carcass of some great beast being reanimated by its own dark will. The curse wasn't done with me. It was never done. The pulse was stronger now, reverberating through the ground, a deep hum that rattled my bones. It was growing. The walls of the hive, what was left of them, were seeping back into the earth, twisting with a sickening crack, as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by this invisible force. It wasn't just the curse. The hive was alive. It was trying to regenerate, to rebuild, to continue its spread. I backed away, instinctively, but the space around me was closing in. It was as if the very earth was pulling me back, dragging me toward the center, toward the heart of the hive where the curse had begun. And then I saw it, the shape in the distance, looming against the wreckage of the chamber. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a creature. It was a figure, twisted and malformed, stretching upwards from the ruins. The skin, that same sickening amalgamation of flesh and metal, had begun to reform, wrapping itself around the remnants of the broken walls. A new form was taking shape. The heartbeat of the hive was louder now. It was alive, feeding on itself, expanding into something beyond comprehension. The figure moved slowly, agonizingly, but its movement was controlled, purposeful. It was the last of the skin priests, I realized, or rather, what remained of the twisted priesthood that had caused this nightmare. But it was different now. More than just flesh. It was everywhere. The voice came again, deep and layered, echoing in the air. We are eternal. We are reborn. The mass of flesh and bone twisted, pulsing with a rhythm that was both alien and intimate. I could feel it in my own chest, in my very blood, the connection to this thing. I was connected to it now. I was not just a witness anymore. I was part of it. The curse had infected me the moment I set foot on this wretched world. And now it was waiting for me to embrace it. But I wasn't done yet. The detonators I had used were gone. The blast hadn't been enough. The hive had adapted. But there was one thing left I could do, one final attempt to stop it. I gritted my teeth and pulled myself together, my mind racing, my thoughts blurry. There had to be another way. If the core wasn't destroyed, if the curse had merely been pushed back, then I would have to seal it. I would have to collapse the entire structure, bury it beneath the earth once and for all. I couldn't do it alone. The curse had already claimed so much, but maybe, just maybe, I could take one last stand, force it into the depths where it could never rise again. I moved forward, my legs shaking, my resolve hardening. The figure in front of me was growing, its shape expanding, reaching toward me with elongated arms, its face a mockery of the people I had once known. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, but this time I wasn't going to run. I would end it. For all of us. I just had to get to the core. I just had to destroy what was left. The figure smiled, its teeth sharp and jagged, and I could hear the whispers again, louder now, taunting me. You cannot escape. But I had no intention of escaping. Not anymore. This would be the end. With one final desperate charge, I sprinted toward the heart of the hive, ready to finish what I had started. But the walls were already closing in,